Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." And he said, Jesus, "There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. Apologize, I lost my spot. And he arose and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe, and put it on him. And put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. This is the word of God. I'm excited to share this message with you this morning because it is from my favorite passage of Scripture. It's one of my favorite stories in all of Scripture because it just talks about the heart of the Father. So many times when we read the parable of the prodigal son, we think about how terrible the prodigal son is and the bad things that he did and his path back to redemption. But usually we don't really focus on the heart of the Father and his love towards his son. And it's all predicated. The reason that Jesus is telling this story, the reason that Christ is talking to the people about this is because of what happens in verse 2. And I'll share probably 2 more weeks on Luke 15. And every single week we're going to start in verses 1 and 2 just because we need to know who Jesus is talking to and why. Because it starts out with the sinners and tax collectors drew near to him. And ultimately that upset the Pharisees and the scribes in verse 2. And they scoff and they say, I can't believe this man eats with sinners. Or it says he allows them near to him and he even eats with them. And so we have to understand that Jesus is speaking directly to 2 groups of people. And each part of this parable kind of references back to one of these groups of people. And specifically this morning, the parable of the prodigal son references the sinners and tax collectors. It's all about them and their lives. Because as Jewish citizens, they were born into the Jewish heritage of faith. They were born into the way that they operated in that life back then. And because of their lineage and because of their bloodline, they were accepted as God's chosen people. But many of them had made poor decisions, and many of them had walked away from the faith. Many of them had left their family. Many of them had left their lineage, and they were living on their own, living their own lives, doing things in a way that was not up to par as the Scriptures had demanded. And they were ostracized, cast out, and looked upon with sometimes pity, but most of the time with disgust and disdain. And so Jesus comes and he starts interacting with and spending time with and hanging out with the sinners and tax collectors. And he spends more time with them than he does in the synagogues. He spends more time with them than he does with the religious leaders. He spends more time with the sinners in the highways and byways of life than he does at the church with the church people and the religious people. And it starts to ruffle the feathers and upset the religious elite. And so the purpose of this entire chapter is to prove that both groups who were hearing had an opportunity to draw near to God. Both groups of people, because the Pharisees were farther off than they thought they were, and the sinners and tax collectors were closer than they thought they were. They just needed the bridge, which is Jesus Christ, that leads them to the Father. Christ is the bridge. Christ is the line. Christ is everything that we need to meet with the Father. And he comes to tell them this. And so when we jump into verse 11, where he says there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, I want the portion of the property that's coming to me," that was incredibly offensive. He basically, in this parable, Jesus is saying that this boy comes to his father and says, "Dad, you're dying too slowly because I know that until you die, I'm not going to get this money. I'm not going to get the property. I won't get the shares of the estate. So you're dying too slowly. I need you to die quicker. And since you won't, I just want you to go ahead and give me what I want." Now, I don't know how many of you in this room are fathers, but I can imagine that it wouldn't be a fun conversation to have with your son to come and tell you, "Listen, not only do I want this money before you die, but I'm also the one who doesn't have as much right to it because I'm the younger son." But it says that the father divided his property among them. So he gave 2/3 of his estate to the older son, and he gave 1/3 of his estate to the younger son. And it says, not many days later, the younger son then takes all that he has and he goes to a far off land. So it takes him, after he has the conversation with his father where he says, "Dad, you're not dying fast enough," he hangs around the house for a few days. Can you imagine that? How disrespectful that was to say that. And then, I need to hang around for a few days to get my affairs in order, to make sure that I can get all of the things that belong to me. I got to make sure that no stone is unturned and no check is marked. And I've got to make sure that every single dollar I can take is going to come with me. So I'm going to hang out for a few days before I leave. And then it says that he takes a journey to a far off country where he squanders his money on prodigal living. And he basically just goes and starts spending money like he will never run out. I don't know how many of you, when you got your first job, you got your first paycheck. I remember when I got my first job and my first paycheck, I was like, sweet, I got like $200. I'm going to go and I'm going to buy all the things. And then I realized that all the things were way more expensive than $200. So I was like, well, I'll buy some of the things. And the day after I had my first paycheck, the paycheck was gone. And I was like, oh no, what have I done? I've got 2 more weeks to wait until I get another paycheck. Well, that's basically what this boy does, except it takes a little longer than 2 weeks for him to spend all of his money. And the way that I look at it is he went to a place like Las Vegas or New Orleans or somewhere, Atlantic City, where he just goes and, sinful living is at a premium and he can afford to buy it. And so he has friends while he has money. And he's, going into nightclubs and he's, drinking alcohol and he's doing drugs and he's spending time with prostitutes because later in the story his brother affirms that fact. And he just keeps spending and spending and spending. And then it says, in verse 14, it says, "And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that land." So it was kind of like, out of the frying pan into the fire situation, because he was like, well, dang it, now I don't have any money. Well, I know, I'll go get a job, I'll hire myself out, it's no big deal. But then a famine arises, and so there's no money to be found in that land, and so now he's in a real pickle. He goes from wealthy, prideful, head high, shoulders back, strutting into the town, to now he has nothing. He's destitute. And about the time that he spends his last dollar is when it stops raining and crops stop producing. An economic recession hits the land and no one can help him. And this part is the part of the story where a lot of us in the West don't understand how disgusting this next part sounds to the people that it was being relayed to. It says he found one of the people of that country and he hired himself out to him. He basically became an indentured slave to this man. And it says that he sent him out to the fields to feed the pigs. Now, there's not really anything in American society that I can even relate this to, as far as a job so disgusting that everybody in this room would literally just gasp if I told you that somebody took it. Because we don't understand how dirty and disgusting and gross and how low on the totem pole it would have been to be somebody who was working in a field feeding pigs to first century Jews. I cannot think of something other than somebody who may like clean septic systems for a living, but I'm pretty sure they make decent money cleaning septic systems because of how gross it is. But this guy hires himself out as an indentured servant, so he's not even making any money. He's just out there hoping to eventually get a job with this man. And it says that he's so hungry that he longs for the pods that the pigs ate. He wants to eat pig food. It looked good to him. He was like Templeton the rat from Charlotte's Web. He was ready to eat it all. But no one gave him anything. And so eventually he comes to his senses. He remembers back and he figures out, hold on. I'm in a field dying, starving to death, wishing that I could eat something that the pigs would eat. And the servants back home, even the servants in my father's house, have plenty of bread. They have more than enough. And here I am starving to death. And he says, I know. I'll go back home, but I'm not going to just go back home. Because in his head, he can't just go back home. He's decided that he's no longer worthy to be called a son. And he decides that he wants to go back home and he wants his father to treat him like a slave. He's decided that he is worthless and he's going to concoct a speech to go back home and try and weasel his way back into living at the father's property. So he says, okay, here's what I'll tell him when I'm on and he's practicing the speech over and over. Father, I've sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired servants. Father, I've sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he's rehearsing this over and over and over in his head. And I don't know how, it doesn't specify how long it would have taken him to get back home, but it says he was in a far country. And he had to walk the entire way back. And so the entire time he's rehearsing this speech, he's also probably rehearsing the thousands of ways that his father could react to how he comes back home. Because when this boy left, he was, dressed to the nines, and he had chest out, shoulders back, head up, eyes with pride, and just walking out like he owned the joint and like nothing could touch him. And now he's going to come home and he is destitute, desolate, and has nothing left. And I don't know how many of you, when you were in trouble with your parents, or did something you weren't supposed to do, or broke a vase, or threw a ball through a window or something, and you're like, all right, I got to butter this person up. I got to figure out a way to, ease the blow of what I'm about to tell them, and come in like, Dad, you're so awesome. Mom, you're the greatest. Anybody ever tell you just have the prettiest hair? And you smell so good, Mom. And they're like, what do you want? Like, what is going on here? I feel like that's the first part of this speech, is him coming in just being like, I got to try and do something with my words to earn my way back in, to be able to. And so he's like rehearsing over and over, I've sinned against heaven and against you, Father. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. It says he turns the corner, and it says, while he was a long way off, his father saw him, ran to him, had compassion on him, fell on him hugged him and kissed him. Now, there are a few different ways that we can look at this, because if you're looking at it from the father's perspective, he's so overjoyed and elated that his boy is finally home. My son has come home, my child that I thought was dead. I thought he was gone because I hadn't heard anything in a long time, and I know there's a famine in the land that he went to. I think he's gone. I think he's gone forever. But now I see him walking up the line. I see him walking up the road. I'm going to run to him with compassion and with love in my heart. And there's nothing that's going to keep me from getting to him. And if you're on the side of the son, you see a man running to you that you've never seen run in your entire life. There may be some fear involved in watching this man run towards you. Like, well, I was going to die over there. It might as well die here. So here comes Dad to finish the job. And so the unexpected reaction of, instead of fists and instead of hatred and instead of shouts of rage, he's hugged and he's kissed and he's doesn't even get a chance to give his whole speech. And from the eyes of the Pharisees, this entire parable is falling apart. They're expecting this man to come and finally level judgment on this boy. To finally come and put him in his place and take care of business and do what should have been done in the beginning. And when he told him that he wanted his money, he should have slapped him and told him, you're no good and you got to go work in the fields anyway. They're like, finally. Saw him from a long way off, and then it says he starts running. And dignified men don't run, first of all. A dignified man would have stood on the porch waiting for the son to get there, and he would have watched him walk down the entire way, stone-faced. And so he's running towards this boy who has squandered his wealth. Not the boy's wealth, because the boy didn't do anything to earn it. He squandered his father's wealth on brokenness and disgusting things, on abominations. And so his father is running towards him, and the Pharisees are, all right, okay, he's running because he wants to hit him faster. I don't know. But then it says he feels compassion on him and falls upon him and hugs him and kisses him. And it just doesn't square with the Pharisees, because they're so religious. They're so stuck in do's and don'ts, wrong and right. And if you do this, there is a bad repercussion. And if you do this, then there's a good repercussion. And it's all about wins and losses, checks and balances, and being better and being better and being better. So it's completely flipping the script on them to say that this boy has gone out and done the unthinkable and come home and the father is glad to see him. And he gets out half of his speech. Father, I've sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. And about the time he's about to say, make me one of your servants, the father does something very interesting. He turns to his servant and he says to his servants, get the best robe and put it on him. And while you're at it, grab a ring and put it on his hand, and get some shoes and put them on his feet. And then go and grab the fattened calf and kill it, and let's celebrate, because this, my son, was lost and he's found. He was dead and he's now alive. Now, this is meaningful, because the boy wanted to become one of the servants. And the father used the servant to show the son he would never be a servant. He would always be a son. No matter where he went, no matter what he did, no matter what he got into, if he came home, he could always come home and he would always be a son. And those three items, he used the best robe. This boy is still covered in pig filth. He's still covered in the dirt and the dust of the road and the sweat and all the things that he's been in, because he just came straight home from being in a pig's field. And he puts the best robe on this boy, covering up the dirt, covering up the sinfulness. And he puts a ring on his finger. And a ring basically signifies that this boy now has access to this father's line of credit. It's a way for him to go into the city and do business as his father. And probably the most important part is he put shoes on his feet. And by putting shoes on the boy's feet, it signified that you are not a slave. You are not a servant, because servants don't wear shoes, but sons do. You'll never be a servant in my kingdom. You're never going to be considered a slave in my kingdom. You're never going to be considered anything other than my son. I don't care about all the stuff that you did. I don't care about the brokenness that you've been walking in. I don't care about the dirt that you've got on you. I don't care about any of those things. You're finally home, and that's all I care about. And since you're home, we're going to kill the fattened calf, and we're going to throw a party, and people are going to talk about this party for generations. The heart of the Father is always for his children. The heart of the Father is constantly pointed towards you. I don't know if you've walked away. I don't know if you've run away. I don't know if you've gone off into the far land and done things that you're not proud of and not happy about. But if you did, you can always come home. You can always come back to the Father, because he longs to see you come back to him. And he will run to you, and he will meet you where you're at. He will meet you on the journey back home. He doesn't wait for you to get to the porch. He doesn't wait for you to ring the doorbell. He doesn't wait for you to, come and request a meeting with him, and hopefully he's available. He is waiting and watching and looking, eyes to the horizon, hoping that he sees you walking. I don't know if you've ever picked someone up from the airport, or you haven't seen somebody in a while, and as they're coming through baggage claim, or as they're coming out of the gate, you're like, is that Bill, or is that, no, that's not them, because it's not the right walk. That's not the way that's not the way that my friend walks. That's not the way that my son walks. And eventually you're like, oh, that's them. That's them. I recognize them because I'm familiar with how they walk. I'm familiar with their gait. I'm familiar with the way their hands bounce when they walk or whatever. And so it's like, awesome, I see them. It's the way the Father is looking on the horizon. He was looking for his son, and he recognized how the son walked. He recognized how his boy walked. Even dismayed with his head down, he still recognized his boy. And he ran to him, and he covered him up. He wouldn't even let him talk. He wouldn't let him get out his entire speech. He interrupted him. He wouldn't let him get out the part about being a slave, because in his mind there was no consideration of the fact that this son could ever be a slave, because he was always a son. Next week we're going to get into his older brother and the discord that this celebration brought. But this week I just want to end here with the father running towards the son who disrespected him, who told him, Dad, you're not dying fast enough. I want my money. Who went and squandered it all, but ultimately came home. And his father met him with love, met him with a celebration, met him with his heart wide open. No questions asked. He didn't ask the son, well, what did you do? What were you in? How come you don't have any money left? You spent all of it? Wow, that's really reckless. That's stupid. I don't care. He puts a ring on his finger so he can go spend more of his money. It doesn't make sense. The love of the Father, the love of God, does not make sense, because he loves us with something called agape love. In English, we have one word that says love, and it is, it's useless sometimes. It's meaningless sometimes. Because I can say, I love my parents. I could say, I love my brother. And I can also say, I love powdered donuts. And I love, this television show, or I love the New Orleans Saints, or I love Texas Tech football. And it's like that word does not mean the same thing in all of those statements. But it's the only one we've got. In Greek, they had multiple words for love. And the one that is used in the famous love scripture in 1 Corinthians 13 is this word agape. And that word does not make sense to the American mindset, especially in our just the way that we interact with each other. It's all based off of you do this for me and I'll do this for you. And it's like an equal and opposite interaction. And my level is here and I need your level to come up here. It has nothing to do with that. It's all about agape love is basically love that is perfect and does not expect reciprocation. He simply loves because he is love, and he loves you because you're his, and he created you and he made you and he called you and he adopted you in. And his love, he doesn't expect anything in return. He just pours it out and showers it upon you because he knows we could never pay him back for the love that he's given us. He knows that we could never match his love. He knows we could never come even close to what he's done. Yet, he consistently continues to love us perfectly. Without falter, without turning, without shadow, he loves you. The heart of the Father is greater than anything we could ever experience. We cannot even fathom the depth and the breadth and the height of the love of the Father. My goal and my prayer for you is that you will continue to consistently pray that the Father would reveal how much he loves you every day. Paul tells the church in Philippi, I believe it is, that his prayer is always that God would reveal more of how great, deep, wide his love is. And if you have walked away, if you have run and turned away and gone a way you're not supposed to, there's always room back at the house. Come home. He desires for you to come home. And he's not going to meet you with anger. He's not going to meet you with fists. He's going to meet you with hugs. He's going to meet you with a robe, with a ring, and with sandals.